Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Olivia. I'm also known as the Carnivoreballerina, and today I spoke with James, the Carnivorist. James has a podcast of his own, so you can go check it out anywhere you have your podcast and on social media at James, the Carnivorist. Today we spoke about a lot of different things, some things I've experienced, so we have a lot in common. He was a vegetarian and then went vegan for one too many years and was wasting away, and then was able to come back, revive himself, fix his life with a carnivore diet. And that's what he's currently doing. He's also very much knowledge on oxalates, which I don't have quite as much experience on because I haven't experienced that. Apart from being vegetarian, vegan, and dealing with all of that, he also had mold, parasites, and heavy metals, and you can imagine what that does. So we spoke about that, how you can detox from it, and just symptoms and all sorts of things related. So this was a very interesting episode, and if you haven't already, go check out his channel, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. So hi, James. Thank you for coming on and letting me interview you and share your story. You've had a lot of similarities to me, as in toxicities, environmental, as well as, I guess, other organisms and living things. So yeah, I'd love to know more about you, and also just a basic brief rundown of who you are and what it is that you do. And then we'll get into your health journey up until now.
Absolutely, Olivia. Such a pleasure to be here today and to share my story. Yeah, from learning what I have about you and my own personal journey, which the listeners will get to hear in a second, we do share a lot of similarities in what we went through. And boy, it can really be a lot. And I'll start from the beginning, as one is apt to do, and just let the listeners know I am coming to you today from, and I was born and raised on the beautiful island of Bermuda. So that's where I'm coming to you from today. And I am a child of the 70s and 80s. So I was raised by my parents here on the low fat way of eating that had come about through the American dietary standards. So you think of that time, it was right when those dietary guidelines came out. So, of course, many folks followed that, i.e. low-fat, high-carb diets. And my mom was a vegetarian too. So, and she still is to this day. So that greatly influenced, of course, what was being served to me at a young age. And of course, we were raised on things like cereal and Pop-Tarts in the morning and all those kind of things. And I tended to be a little bit of a chunkier kid, as you can imagine. Grew up fairly normally and ended up going away to boarding school and then university in Canada. The experience in boarding school was a really good one for me because I went there when I was 14 years old, and I, of course, had meals prepared for me in the dining hall, but those meals started to include a lot more meat. So I got into athletics a lot more. I was rowing crew and also playing basketball, gaining a lot of muscle and height. I'm 6'2". And it was a great experience. And I was actually touted to compete for my university, both in rowing and play basketball as well. I ended up separating my shoulder, so that never panned out. But it was a really, really good time. University, just fast forwarding a little bit, I actually met a young lady and we started dating, and she was a vegetarian at the time. So you got to remember, this was the early 90s to mid 90s, and there wasn't a lot of stuff out there at this time for the vegan and vegetarian diet. So pretty admirable for her at that time being a vegetarian. She's since gone on, I understand, though I don't keep up with her too much anymore, to become a veterinarian. So go figure. Anyhow, long story short, whilst we were together, I said, okay, well, tell me more about this way of eating. What's the benefits? And of course, she told me, and I thought, well, hey, I might as well do it. Gave it a shot. Unfortunately, at the time, I ended up getting very sick from salmonella poisoning. And because I continued to have a couple of pieces of chicken from here and there. And then I decided, well, I'm going to go even stricter with my diet, came back home, got into the working world, and still maintained this vegetarian diet. Now, I dabbled off and on a little bit with fish, being from Bermuda, because you imagine, as an island, tons of fish in my upbringing, but there were times as well that I went strict vegetarian, meaning just some eggs, but that's it as far as animal products for many years. And I started to put on a lot of weight because I was eating sort of like the very convenient vegetarian diet, Olivia. It was a lot of chips and crackers and pastas and things like that. So I started to put on a lot of weight, just got into the working world. So it was, out on a Friday night, bunch of beers with your friends, and here comes the vegetarian processed microwave food. Jumping ahead a little bit more, as that went on, my health started to go downhill quite a bit because I was overweight. I wasn't really taking care of myself as I should. But here's where we tie into my experience with you. I ended up collapsing at home one day. I passed out and fell down and actually gave myself a bad concussion and ended up in hospital for a week. And they ran a battery of tests on me. And what came back was positive viral markers for Epstein-Barr or mono. It had been a prior infection that was reoccurring. So my body was not able to continue fighting out. And that's called chronic Epstein-Barr. And that will come back, and I'll stop for a second, but that will come back in my story later on down the journey.
Yeah, there's a lot right there that's to unpack, but I just want to start off then. So you were basically brought up fairly vegetarian then until you went off to boarding school, and then you had some more meat, and then you got into college, and then you went vegetarian again.
Mm-hmm. Basically, that's what happened. I did have burgers and stuff and some meat when we were younger. My dad on occasion would throw some burgers on the grill, and he made great burgers. But for the most part, because my mom was doing a lot of the cooking, there were a lot of pastas and cereals. And as I said, Pop-Tarts in the morning and these things because it was convenient. And there was I can't believe it's not butter in the fridge and not actual butter. And yeah, so that was the way. And then, as I said, I went to boarding school. They had a lot of good stuff because the chef was actually from Hungary, who was the chef. So we had a lot of meats and Hungarian goulash and things like that. And so I was eating a lot of meat and a more varied diet, let's say, when I was in boarding school, and became quite athletic, as I said, and into weights and exercise. And then went off and met this young lady, and that influenced me a great deal. And yeah, that's what happened there.
Yeah. Okay. And then for the viral Epstein-Barr, I know how that goes. Did they ever tell you, or did you ever figure out like how you got infected with that?
No, they never did say. They just said that it looked like I had a reoccurrence of it prior to me collapsing. That's why I was so fatigued. And I basically keeled over, smashed my head, and passed out. And I kept passing out. So it was actually quite scary. The ambulance came and took me to hospital, and I was in, as I said, for a week because they were worried it was much worse than it was. But the only thing they really dug up was this chronic Epstein-Barr, which was continued to replicate in my system because I was just not in a good, healthy position to be able to fight it. But they never did tell me how I could have picked it up. But as you and I know, probably now from investigating, there are a myriad of ways of picking up Epstein-Barr. So you just never know.
Yeah, right. Wow. That's pretty severe. Cause I remember we thought that I had it, and we weren't doing the more so like conventional ways of testing for it. And it really just drains you. It takes everything out of you. It's like you bend over and you come back up and you're seeing stars. You're just so fatigued. But I think in medical terms, it's called like the kissing virus or something. And that's how you're supposed to get it or something like that. But there's like a million different ways that you can actually get it. Yeah.
Yeah. You can actually pick it up, I think, through contact with a glass that hasn't been washed properly, there's a myriad of ways, but yeah, it is called the kissing disease because that's the sort of the way they figured that happened back in the day, but yeah, it's and it's a really a bad one to get. I feel sorry for folks that have the chronic version of it, because if you got it once and you're done with it and they can't really find the markers anymore, that's really great. That's a sign that your immune system is functioning properly. But as I get on to in my story, you'll find out that I compromised my immune system even further, which is why mine chronically kept coming back and back and back. And I was constantly fatigued and affected my thyroid too.
Right. So then being brought up mostly vegetarian, and then you were vegetarian, eventually vegan for a while, that obviously then suppressed your immune system. So then it was able to just never be fought off. So it's a chronic condition, right?
Yep. I have it tested quite regularly, and now my markers are almost negligible. I feel wonderful now. It's like it's not even there anymore. But honestly, I look back at some of my test results, Olivia, and my titers, they're called titers, which are the levels of it in your blood or wherever else, they want to measure it, were astronomical. Like even my doctor was like, wow, this is really high, James. I'm like, yeah, no wonder. He's like, no wonder you're exhausted all the time. No wonder you're feeling like your temperature is, you always feel hot or cold rather, and your thyroid's out of whack. But it can be really problematic for folks that don't have a strong immune system.
Yeah, definitely. So what were the recommendations or things that you were told by the doctor when you were getting all these markers, and then initially when you were taken to the hospital?
Yeah, at the hospital, they basically sent me home for bed rest. I was off work for almost a month, and they actually recommended longer, but I was stubborn and thought, yeah, I need to go back to work after a month. I got kind of bored at home, to be honest with you. And, but yeah, it was mostly bed rest and hydration, and that was it. And I did feel better after resting because it was really stressful, as you can imagine, being so sick and not knowing what it was. So at first they're like, well, we're testing for hepatitis, we're testing for this and that. And I felt like a human pincushion at some points. The amount of blood I've had drawn, I'm still surprised I have any in me, Olivia. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think that would make it even worse to have all of these tests I mean, to some extent they needed to test you, but to have all this blood being drawn whilst you're fatigued, it's kind of not helping the situation any.
Yeah, absolutely. And so basically what I'll say now is, and I'll just get to the part where I end up going vegan.
Right.
I started to investigate again for my health because, as I mentioned before, I was putting on weight. I wasn't doing a lot the exercise I had done when I was in university and in boarding school. So it had gotten to me, and that was a big scare for me. So I was like, I've got to take care of my health. I've got to do better things. So I started investigating, and of course, a lot of the stuff online, with a lot of the propaganda out there, comes back the vegan diet. I thought, well, if I'm vegetarian, the next step is to go vegan. Saw all the propaganda pieces in terms of cowspiracy, forks over knives, all those things. And it was a fairly easy jump for me. And all the stuff online that I read was talking about, this is the healthy way. Your body's meant to eat only plants and fruit, and you're going to heal whatever it is that you have going on with you. Because yeah, I was scared. I was really scared. And so I dove headfirst into a 6-year journey with strict, and when I say strict, I mean very strict veganism. I did not touch any food for an animal for those 6 years. And I will start by saying that it did help initially for the first year or two, and let you ask any questions.
Yeah. I was going to say, initially, did you feel any better? But probably because you're just taking out, I'm assuming that you went the whole foods type of vegan, right?
Yep. Whole foods, plant-based. And so, yeah, absolutely right. I took a lot of the processed junk out and ate a lot of, some raw, some cooked vegetables, really focused on whole foods. And I lost weight. I got back into exercise again and definitely felt better for a couple of years, looked better, felt healthier. However, and I'll get into this as well, is that by the 4th year, I should have started noticing that the deficiencies in the diet were beginning to creep up with me. And I was not paying attention because I was thinking, well, at this time I was in my 40s. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting a little older now. Maybe that's why I'm forgetting things, or the brain fog's creeping in. But I started to notice things like I was getting stiffer. My joints were hurting a little bit more. And I just assumed it was part of the aging process. No, it was not. I'll detail that too.
Yeah. And for anyone that would say you've done vegan wrong, maybe you said that your wife even became a certified vegan chef, right?
She sure did. Yep. And not only just one level, but 5 levels of certification she did. She actually owned her own business for a while where she did food prep and meal prep planning services for vegans, and then her own plant-based baking business where she did that, which has since switched as well. But yeah, we ate very, very well. I can tell you that. It was like restaurant quality dishes. I mean, it was really good, and whole foods, plant-based, really good stuff, and local produce that we have here in Bermuda, because actually Bermuda is a great place to get vegetables. The soil's so fertile because Bermuda was formed by a volcano many, many, many years ago. So the soil is really fertile. We have really great soil for growing vegetables.
Yeah. So then you said at the 5-year period was when you began to notice all these things, and you should have been a bit more conscious or aware that these weren't really normal things. It's not just the aging process, because 40 is still pretty young. You shouldn't be having all those things. So then what caused you to eventually start looking into possibly diet? Because normally people would just think, well, maybe I just have some, I don't know, inherited problems or medical issues. It's not my diet. Because for me,
everyone that I've met that has an issue, they don't necessarily initially look into diet being their problem. But of course, you were very aware of your diet, so possibly because of that.
Olivia, great questions. I'll say this is that I never in a million years thought it could have been the diet, again, because everything I read online, my GP, my doctor was telling me, you're eating about as healthy as anyone could eat, James. I don't understand. I said that I don't understand, and just continue what you're doing. We're going to do additional testing. However, like I said, I was literally sitting at work and I was typing away busily, and then I would forget what I was doing. I would be like, what am I doing? Where am I? I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I started to get a little worried about that. And then the fainting episodes started coming back. I actually gave blood and then passed out after giving blood and hit my head really badly. I think there's still a scar here on one side, I think it's here, where I fell down and hit my head on the door handle, split it wide open, and passed out at the bottom of the stairs. Again, gave myself a concussion. And so again, started to be very worried about what was going on, and started to notice that, as I mentioned to you, that my joints and everything were hurting tremendously. I almost felt like I had arthritis. At one point, I had to wear a wrist brace on my wrist at work because it was so painful. It looked like I had a claw. I couldn't really extend my fingers. And I'm like, okay, this is craziness. What's going on here? So again, me being the stubborn man that I am, I'm like, this is not the diet. I've got to test other things. And this is where we're going to get into testing for heavy metals and parasites and all those fun things.
Okay, so then before switching over, you tested for all those different parasites and heavy metals. Okay. Yeah, so then I remember, of course, you mentioned that you ended up having parasites and heavy metals. So how did that go? Like, what did you test for, and how did, just for people to know, like, how can you test for these things as well?
Yeah. So I found a naturopathic doctor here in Bermuda, which was really great. And that actually was a really, really formative thing for me. And I'll get into why it was in a little bit later on. But I took a trip, which was probably the last trip I remember feeling semi-decent, to another island down south. I don't like to talk about where it was because I don't want people to get offended, but the water definitely was not very clean there, especially, for folks that happen to live there. But let's just say that I'm pretty positive that I picked up a parasitic and bacterial infection while I was there, because I know because I was later tested for it. And that's the last sort of trip that I remember feeling well. And that was 2019 and sort of the springtime. And when I came back, my digestion started to get really bad. I kept, no matter what I was forcing down my throat, I was just losing weight like crazy, like shedding pounds like unbelievably, and severely constipated. I ended up having blood in my stool quite often. So that's when I got really panicked. And I was like, when folks saw me, they were like, James, what is going on with you? You look terrible. They thought obviously much worse. And people can see the pictures on my Instagram of what I looked like at my lowest weight, which I got down to 127 pounds. But I felt so sick. I actually had to fly away to the US. I went to Virginia to get a testing done because it couldn't be done here in Bermuda. And they were actually going to do a colonoscopy on me to find out what was going on with my digestion. But the stool test that they had to do prior caught that I had a severe bacterial infection, and it's called Plesiomonas shigellosis, I think, but the short name is Shigella, which is a very bad bacterial infection that I had picked up on that trip. And interestingly enough, it causes severe digestive problems, including blood in the stool.
Yeah, I've heard of Shigella. I have not had it, thank God, but that is a severe one. That causes, a digestive issue, severe digestive issues, and then that would also cause possibly some mental issues as well, because you have the connection. A lot of parasites do cause that, and then eventually also just chronic diseases. Yeah. So probably not helping with the Epstein-Barr as well.
Olivia, so astute of you, because this is where I was like, if I have this, and that was bad enough, trust me, even Dr. Baker, when he interviewed me, he was like, damn, James, that's a bad one to get. He was like, it's can be severe. And it was. I mean, when I tell you, I was just, I don't mean to be graphic here, but when I went to use the bathroom, it was mostly blood, scary as hell. You're wondering what the heck is going on. You're losing weight no matter how much you put in your mouth. And again, at this time, remember, I'm still vegan. So I'm thinking I'm doing all the best things for me. Came back home, and then the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, everything here on this little island kind of shut down. So it was incumbent on me to figure out what the heck was going on, because it was very difficult at that time, as we know, with the backdrop of the pandemic, to see your doctor. It had to be virtually. You couldn't really do much testing. And if testing was taking place, because we have to send the exams off island, it took weeks and weeks. And I was getting worse and worse and more fatigued. The one thing that they could do here, Olivia, was test the Epstein-Barr again. And I had it retested, and it was active that time. So I had active chronic Epstein-Barr going on top of Shigella. My immune system was shutting down. And I honestly did not think I was going to be around much longer. So I found this naturopathic doctor, as I mentioned. I said, well, if I got this, let's just test other stuff out. And sure enough, all kinds of things came back on my test. I had a full stool panel done and severe candida infection. My tongue was white all the way down. It was terrible. I had a type of worm as well. The name is escaping me right now. On top of the Shigella, on top of the Epstein-Barr, because where one of these things goes, and your immune system can be regulated by parasites, because they want to live at a low basal body temperature. They make your body temperature go down. They affect your thyroid. Epstein-Barr is affecting my thyroid, and they're all having a big party inside me, and I'm literally feeling like I'm dying, and probably would have, hadn't I made some changes in my life.
Yeah, and then of course with the vegan diet, you're then constantly feeding them, because they feed off of like dampness. So then everything, vegetable, whatever, it's all just kind of fermenting in your bowel system. So then that's just feeding onto them to grow and prosper even more. Ugh, yeah, candida, not a good one either.
One of the hardest to get rid of too. And I feel and I empathize with folks that have candida infections. You literally have to strip down, as I did, to the carnivore pretty strictly, and not include dairy early on, because that breaks down into fermented sugars, or can do with the lactose. So it's a tough bugger. And it was one of my biggest ones that really made me sad, because that contributed a lot to my other symptoms, which were, by the way, let me just go down some of the symptoms so the listeners can understand. Besides the chronic pain, which I could probably describe as like an 8 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10 every day, that I couldn't walk. I was just so much pain in my body, and my bones ached, my joints ached. Losing weight, the other physical symptoms were my nails were cracking and falling off. My hair was falling out all over my body. My skin was dry and cracking. And the brain fog was the worst. And that ties into the candida too, because candida affects that so much. And then the clogged ears, where I couldn't hear, I literally could not hear. It felt like I was living in a fishbowl 24/7. And it just takes me back now to, Olivia, to that feeling and how far I've come and how badly I felt, that I'm so grateful. And we can talk about the journey going on in a minute, but I'm just so grateful that there's information out there, and for your podcast too, that you're letting people share their stories that can potentially help others.
Yeah, I think that's a huge transformation, to go from possibly not living on for much longer, because you have so many different things, plus you're not getting any of the nutrients that you need to survive, with all those things, just taking any potential nutrients which aren't going to really be absorbed anyways, to now looking as you do. That's a huge transformation, and something to be really proud and grateful of. So yeah.
My key, so you know, was that I found podcasts, as I mentioned, like this, and like the one that I host currently as well. And it literally saved my life, because I started digging into things. I started digging into protocols, if you want to know about that, for getting rid of parasites. I found a company online that are still there called Microbe Formulas, that does a whole big protocol for getting rid of heavy metals, by the way, which we didn't talk about. I did have heavy metals in my testing too. I was severely high in mercury, bromides, halides, and all those other fun ones. But yeah, and took the protocols, which helped. But it wasn't until I came across this presentation by Sally Norton on the toxicities in plants that I really realized that I had been doing it all incorrectly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I haven't heard too much about bromides and the other one for heavy metal toxicity. So what would you get that from? Because mercury is probably the fish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, bromides and fluorides are more on, sort of, yeah. So those sort of bromides, halides, fluorides, excuse me. So they can be present in a whole host of things, but it was mostly for me, when I ran the test on the heavy metal side, was the mercury. And a lot of folks have that. And We all know that mercury is a bioaccumulator. It can be taken up by even plants too, but mostly it is found, and it was found in my prior pescatarian diet where I was eating a ton of large fish here in Bermuda, which we catch, like tuna. You can get it in swordfish, especially, which is very prominent, and other fish here too, because the higher up the food chain the fish is, and the more of it you eat, the more you're going to get these. So folks that we're going to get into the carnivore diet that are eating fish, I often suggest is keeping to things like sardines, mackerel, which have very low levels of mercury, or wild caught salmon and things like that.
Yeah, originally, when I started carnivore, I wasn't doing much fish, but when I did add some in, it was just sardines, just because of that. You have no idea. And now even the wild caught, I am a bit wary on, but I'm sure it's a lot less. Either it has no heavy metals such as mercury, which, that's not a fun one to have at all. But to stick with wild caught or sardines. So then what did you do to detox from all of these things, the parasites and the heavy metals?
So this particular protocol from this company called Micro Formulas has all of these things in it. And there's like a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, and a 4 through their protocol. And it's literally dozens of pills that you're taking. But the first one is to fix your gut. So they always recommend going after the parasitic infections first. So that started with that one. And that was quite the experiment, let me tell you, because I did see them. They came out. And I
know. Yeah. I had to take photos of a couple of them because I just couldn't believe it. It's absolutely disgusting. But the good news is that you can actually see it physically coming out. So then that's kind of like like closure on the situation for you, because then you know that it was there. Because sometimes, especially with parasites, it's very difficult to test for them if you don't get the stool test. And then to know, is it actually in there, especially if it's not like the larger ones, but to actually see them coming out is kind of, I guess, gratifying in a sense.
Oh, yeah, because it just gave me something to pin everything on. I was like, okay, I almost, it sounds gross, but I was always like, yes, okay, now I can go after you buggers. I'm getting you out. And I did. I went after them pretty hard. So this particular protocol uses things like mimosa pudica seed, which is almost like a scrubbing gel. Once it gets in your system, it kind of slows down like a gel and just abrasively pulls them off the side of your intestines as it moves through in your stool and whatever else you're eating. And then it also has things combined in it like wormwood and all those other really high ones that are known to break down parasites. Now, it also included on the first level a binder, which was called their biotoxin binder. So that helped with, again, something else we share in common, mold. Because where there are parasites and where there is mold, they're going to be together. And also, parasites love to have heavy metals in them too. So chances are, if you find that you test for parasites, that you definitely probably have heavy metal toxicity, and there's a good chance you have mold. And what I forgot to tell the listeners is, leading up to me getting so sick, I found out afterwards that I worked in a very, very moldy office, and there was water damage above me for years, which also contributed to my immune system going down. I had the classic case of someone that was getting sick because of exposure to toxins and their dietary choices to go down. And I went down hard, as you've heard.
Yeah, you've had it coming at you from every single angle to just attack your immune system, from the diet, from your environment, and then getting those toxins. So how did you later on find out that you had mold in the office? Was it because you were still working there, or looking back, you could see, oh, it was clearly there? Because that's what happened with me. I'm like, it was obvious. But in the moment, you're so just brain fogged and out of it that you don't kind of realize.
Great question. And so I ended up losing my job, this particular one, because as I mentioned, it happened during the pandemic. There was a bunch of redundancies. And to be honest with you, Olivia, I was not capable at the time. I was so sick from doing my duties. So in some ways it was a blessing. In other ways it was sad because I lost my insurance. So I had to figure out my way to get myself better. So just prior, when I went back to clean out my desk and everything, I was like, let me just take a look up in here, because I always noticed the water damage in the ceiling. And I was like, yeah, just whatever. And man, when I looked in there, it was the day that I was clearing out my desk. I was like, wow, this explains a lot. So then I also had a colleague who used to be in my same office that I moved into, and she actually told me she had to move out because she got so sick. And I'm like, damn, I wish I had known this. I would have avoided the whole mold thing. And Bermuda, if you know Bermuda, Bermuda is a mold paradise because of our high humidity and high heat, and everything's always wet. The walls, everything. You have to be on top of mold in Bermuda. It's terrible.
Yeah. So what do you do for like in your own house now? What do you do to keep out the mold? Do you have like the air purifiers and testers and then cleaning it if it does show up?
Constant cleaning, dusting, cleaning, air purifiers, dehumidifiers going all the time. Yeah, it's a constant progress. And I have to say that I just use standard stuff sometimes. And I know it's not a good idea to use bleach, but sometimes if I have to, I'll use a bleaching product, because sometimes if you kill it off, mold can come back stronger, as you know, with bleach. But I just work with what I've got. I've got some really great air purifiers, HEPA filters, and things like that I use here. And just constantly, you have to constantly wash everything. Wash, make sure you wash. I find it, though, even though I'm on top of it, a couple of days later, I'll be like, oh, look, there's mold forming in the wash again. So it's a pain, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's constant upkeep. That's a lot. So then it's, very humid there and it's constantly growing. You have to be really on top of it. Yeah. Because I've heard with sheets and sometimes clothing, the spores can get into it and then it stays there. So you do have to either wash it out with certain things like, I guess, vinegar, baking soda, bleach, things like that.
Yeah. Olivia, right behind me here is my closet. And just to give the listeners an example, the other day, I was like, at one side, I keep because it does get cool in Bermuda, not cold, but it does get cool in the winter because we're subtropical, not tropical. Hence why mold loves it, because it gets cool and damp too. I went in, I said, let me just take a look at my winter sweaters and stuff just to make sure they're not moldy, because I hadn't really visited them since I put them away this past winter. Oh man. It was like my sweaters were wearing a sweater. I literally had to pull them all out, wash them twice. I'm like, damn, I've really got to keep better on top of this. But it's hard sometimes, you just get busy. But yeah, something you have to be really vigilant for.
Yeah, that would keep you busy. But yeah, very important to stay on top of that. So, okay, so then going back to like how you switched up. So you detoxed with that certain brand of things, which had like all the typical things. And then it also had that other like gel thing that just like kind of, I guess, like pulls at things inside you. And then the binder, I guess, to like absorb everything in there and then just pull it out.
Correct. So it started, as I say, the first stage, the first level was for the parasites. Then it moved on to deeper cellular sort of detoxification, things like your lymph, things like kidney and liver support. So it gave you support all the way through, because your liver, as I found out, and gallbladder got extremely compromised as well and sluggish. And then sort of the very heavy ones at the end were tinctures that had been made, and I forget what's all in them, but they were very, very powerful. It's definitely a bunch of herbs that they put in there, but super powerful for immune support and going after Epstein-Barr, and then the heavy metals, which can be really tough, as you know, to detox. So it had all those things we talked about before in them, plus a binder. So the binder also had the charcoal, plus fulvic and humic acids, plus, you name it. They did a really good job. It was very thorough, but it was also extremely powerful to do to myself in such a compromised state. So I went as far as I could, and admittedly had to stop because it was just way too powerful for my health at the time. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Right. Because then during this whole detoxing process, you were still vegan, you were still eating the vegan diet. So then that's not really helping.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, I was very thankful that I found them. But I had to stop because after a couple of months on it, it helped. I definitely saw the benefits of it getting out, and it helped, but still my gut was still so compromised, because you have to imagine that these supplements are made from seeds and herbs and are very powerful. So it wasn't really allowing things to heal. It was expelling them, but my body needed to just kind of come back and just relax for a little bit. I went really, as I tend to do, gung-ho into it, which I probably in hindsight should not have gone as hard as I did. So as I mentioned, I found Sally Norton online, her presentation called Lost Seasonality and the Overconsumption of Plants, which talked about all the plant toxins, including oxalates, which I later discovered I had been bombing myself with on the vegan diet for years and years, which really contributed to a host of my issues. And it was then that I decided something's got to change dietarily.
Yeah. So then how did you, starting off mentally, how did you make the switch to eating reintroducing animal products into your diet?
Yeah, great question. It was tough, I have to admit. If you can imagine, I had to wrap my head around even fathoming eating animals again. So what I did to start was I chickened out and I went the low oxalate vegetable route for some time. So I lowered the oxalates because I found out that oxalates were and are very bad for you and were what was causing a lot of gut damage to me as well and causing all the aches and pains. And I saw some benefit. Definitely my brain fog started to lift. But what I realized was that I needed to get the nutrition of the animal products back in. So I chose what was most known to me, and then I added fish back in to start. Again, being from Bermuda and again, having some fish throughout my vegetarian years, it just made it easy. So I started with a piece of salmon. Remember putting it on the grill going, here goes, James, here we go. And I kid you not, as sure as I'm sitting here today, a few hours later, I felt like, some of the ex-vegans talk about the lights coming back on. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like my body's screaming for this. And then it definitely was. I realized I had totally not eaten enough fat. I was missing all the nutrients like bioavailable, A, D, E, and K, and B12, and all the good stuff we can find in animal products. And I was off to the races after that. I did take it slowly though, and added things like chicken and sort of like the leaner cuts of meat, because my gallbladder and liver were so compromised. I struggled with fat. In fact, I still struggle with fat to this day. I have to monitor my fat intake pretty closely.
Yeah. So how did you improve your gut to be able to tolerate more fat and things like that?
Yeah.
Initially, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I get asked on a lot. I had to go very slowly, and I had to realize that, number one, as I said, that my system was compromised. So I was not coming at it from a normal position, i.e. someone that had been relatively healthy and not had all the stuff that we had going on in our background. I did a few tests on myself where I realized my stomach acid was non-existent, because as a vegan, it hadn't really been needed that much to break down the connective tissues and collagen in animal food. So my stomach acid was lowered. I had bile insufficiency, also enzyme depletion, because just wasn't necessary. So I had to incorporate things like betaine HCl to raise my stomach acid to start. And what that is, it's a supplement that you take. And the way to figure out that you have low stomach acid is you take a pill and have your meal. If you don't feel your stomach getting warm, you add another pill. And then you add another pill until you get almost a warm sensation in your stomach. It's hard to describe. And then when you get that warm sensation, you've reached your level where your stomach acid is sufficient, and you keep it there. And I got up to like 7 or 8 pills with every meal. So that definitely showed me. You can also do a thing called a baking soda test, where you swallow some baking soda, and then if you burp or whatever, not that your stomach acid is low. I didn't do that. I just knew inherently that mine was low, and I did the warming test where I figured that out. And also the big key was my digestion started to improve. I started to be able to break down these amino acid chains in meat. I didn't feel constipated all the time. I started to have regular bowel movements. I'm like, yes, hallelujah. This is it. And I also figured out that I had bile problems, because I went and had an ultrasound done on my gallbladder, and they found 2 cysts in there. Thank you again, oxalates, and thank you again, the vegan diet, for that. And my sludgy bile, which they can see on the ultrasound, which means your gallbladder is not squeezing to get that bile out, which helps everything in your liver and to detox, and that also break down the fats, emulsify the fats in your food. So I needed help enzymatically. So I bought a high lipase digestive enzyme, which I still use to this day. I'm no longer taking the betaine HCl, because over time your stomach starts to produce the stomach acid again on its own.
Yeah. So for the betaine HCl, you just keep taking that until you feel, so let's say to like slowly reduce off of that to where you wouldn't really need to be taking it anymore. You would take a pill with your meal. And then let's say if you were at 7 and you've taken 5 a couple months later, and you're already feeling that warm feeling, that's when you know that you could like reduce it.
Correct. So if that warm feeling comes on earlier, you know that your stomach acid is starting to produce on its own again. So yeah, you're taking your first and second or third or 5-1, and you'll start to feel it. However, I will say this, Olivia, I have heard other podcasts with vegans and vegetarians that have been in even longer than I did. And Leah Keith is a famous author. She wrote the book called The Vegetarian Myth, and her doctor told her that, in her words, not mine, that her and betaine HCl are going to be friends for a long time. And I'm not sure if she still does, but she often talks about that she's going to need to take hers for life. So I'm very lucky in that regard, because my stint, albeit long enough, was not as long as some folks that have been eating the vegan diet where their stomach acid lowers. As I said, I still need help because of my gallbladder problems. They wanted to take mine out because it was in such rough shape, but I said, no, I know the need for having a gallbladder. I'm going to do my best to try and fix it. I did a few things on that end where I took things like milk thistle and other things that are helping the gallbladder. Ox bile was another one that you can get as a supplement, and I took that. And thankfully, so far, things have been okay. But yeah, I'm still taking the enzyme to this day.
Yeah. So did you have to do anything to, I mean, the carnivore diet kind of does that anyway, to reduce the inflammation for the cysts, like anything extra?
No, but I do get them monitored. I do have them, because if they do grow, I've been told that if they do grow, I will have to have them out, because that's a sign there could be a cancerous cyst there, or could be something worse, or gallstones forming. If I get gallstones, that it would be very, very difficult to pass them if I tried to pass them, which some people do with different protocols. You've probably heard of the grapefruit cleanse and all that stuff. And, but yeah, and olive oil they use together, the grapefruit and olive oil. But I have to keep it monitored. And thus far, very lucky, thank you, Lord, that mine have just stayed the same. And as long as they stay the same, I'm told by my doctor that I'm okay. And definitely things, I mean, Olivia, the change in me has been night and day, as you said. I'm just so thankful because, and I'll also talk a little bit about dairy and adding that back in a second, and how key that was for me, is that when I started to be able to digest my food properly and absorb the nutrients, because again, I firmly believe you are what you absorb, not what you eat. You are what you absorb, because we could be eating the best carnivore diet, but if we're not absorbing it and our gut's a complete mess, it's not going to be as beneficial for us as if we have a good microbiome. So with that being said, one of the things I knew inherently for me, because with oxalates bind to minerals when you eat them and when they're in your body and when you're excreting them. And excreting them is called dumping. Again, thanks, Sally, for the knowledge. But it also leaves you very deplete, and also wrecks your gut microbiome too, because they're like little glass shards that are literally sandpaper going through your digestion. So you can imagine I was eating all the spinach, all the chard, the beets, which are high oxalate, chia seeds. My poor gut was just a mess, plus the bacterial and viral infections I had. It also depletes calcium in your body. So I had probably osteoporosis and all kinds of other things going on with the lack of calcium in my diet for years on the vegan diet. So I knew inherently that I wanted to incorporate fermented dairy into my diet early on. And like many folks that start the carnivore way of eating that have problems with digestion, they come across the great old thing called histamine intolerance. And boy, was that a pain for me, Olivia, because I would take a little sip of kefir and my tongue would swell and I would get brain fog and the tinnitus in my ears would come back. And I'm like, please, I know it would have been so, at that time I was like, I know, body, this is so good for me, because fermented dairy really has all those good probiotics in it. It's a natural food that we can get. But it was a really long road with me introducing dairy. And all to say is that I went very, very slowly. I literally had a shot glass filled with a little small sip of goat's milk. And the reason I chose goat's milk is because it's more easily tolerated than regular cow's milk for folks. Sometimes it's the closest animal milk to human breast milk that they found is goat's milk, interestingly enough. So that's why I was like, well, I'm going to do this. It's fermented. It has all the good things. Even that was causing histamine response in me. And what I found out through talking to experts like Monique Addinger and Sally is that histamines and oxalate toxicities go hand in hand, because literally oxalates affect us from the cellular level, the mitochondria. So the immune response is coming in thinking you have a foreign invader in your cells. The mast cells, which produce histamine, are kicking off. So your body's just going, alert, alert, alert. So if it doesn't recognize something, you have to calm it down. I went very, very, very slowly with dairy. I did a lot of mental work as well, just meaning I did a program called DRNRS, which is neural retraining for the brain. I basically tried to meditate and tell my body, this is going to be good for you. Just relax, James. It's going to be good. And they say in life, Olivia, whatever you resist persists. So I basically had to wrap my mind around that this was good for me, and my body was going to accept it, and I was going to be able to do it. Now, I know it sounds a lot of hooey and all that stuff, but it did work. But, some people give up. They give up after having, and I understand why they give up, because these histamine intolerances can be really, really bad. But all I'll say is I went very slowly, and it took 1.5 years to almost 2 years to where I could now pretty much drink dairy without any issues whatsoever. And when I say dairy, I mean fermented dairy and raw cheese. I don't have the liquid form. It just fermented kefir in the mornings, and my raw cheeses work very, very well for me. But yeah, it can be a process.
Yeah. Wow. That's a huge switch. I do want to get into the mental thing though, because I experienced that as well. And it's not talked about a lot. A lot of people just stick with the diet and the physical and not actually the mental aspect of it. But so for a histamine intolerance, potentially you could kind of switch that around by really, really slowly introducing things and then upping the dosage over like a span of 1 year or 2.
Yeah. Folks need to be aware. And again, I'm not the expert on histamines, but I've done a lot of research on my own behalf. And I'm actually speaking with Monique Adinger again this week. And she's a histamine and oxalate expert. And from speaking to her, one of the biggest challenges dietarily folks can face are when they come from both a high oxalate background and have histamine intolerance mast cell activation syndrome, which can be really challenging because you've really got to pare the diet down. Because when you look at the high oxalate foods and then you look at the high histamine foods, you really got to go way down. And what folks don't realize is that aged meats, things like sardines, things like dry aged meat, and if you have ground beef out for too long, can be very high histamine as it starts to sit in the fridge. So you've got to freeze your dry beef, ground beef, bring it down where it's just thawed, and put it on the grill and eat it that same day. You've got to really look at things like different berries. If you're still eating berries, have high histamine. There's a whole list of foods. So you've got to be very careful and very methodical. In fact, Monique is going to be offering a coaching course specifically on this issue on high histamine and oxalate problems coming up. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so then for the oxalates, since you obviously were consuming very high oxalate vegan diet, how did you switch on to carnivore? Because you would need to still, because there's the oxalate dumping. What was that like? Yeah.
So again, excellent questions. I love these type of discussions, Olivia, because I want people to learn and not do what I did.
Yeah.
And I honestly, once I got my digestion in order through use of the betaine HCl and also the digestive enzymes, I was like, I started to feel so great. I mean, you can imagine where I was coming from to where I started to feel like I could exercise again. My brain fog started to lift. I was so excited about the mental clarity I got from this way of eating. I was like, I feel like I'm a new person. I started to put on weight. I was exercising again. I was like, right, that's it. Vegetables are out. I'm going full bore into the carnivore diet, only eating meat. I am carnivore. Watch me roar. And I felt great for 3 months. And then all of a sudden, during that 4th month, boom, I got hit with the famous oxalate dumping symptoms, which are exactly what it sounds like, where you feel like you've been hit by a truck. And I thought, what the heck is going on? I actually reached out to Sally online and said, Sally, help, what's happening? And she's like, hey, slow down there, cowboy. You are going way too fast, because what happens is all those oxalates that have been stored in your tissues and other places in the body for many years that you've been consuming, because you have to remember the body can only process so many oxalates at a time. And it's a very small amount. Think in the smallest milligram amounts. And that's, that can form kidney stones. I was going in the thousands of milligrams almost a day. So the body stores them in old injury sites, connective tissues in your fascia. And when you go off, the body goes, hey, he stopped bombing us with all this stuff. We're going to just start releasing it, because the way that oxalate comes out are through the stool, the urine, your sweat, tear ducts, and I said stool, urine. Yeah, pretty much. And saliva. Excuse me. That was the other one. So, and when it's going out, it can be worse than when it's going in. Because it depends on your health position at the time. Because, at the time I was thinking I was healthy and I was like, okay, yeah, I've got some aches and pains. But if you're in a position where your immune system compromised and you're not exactly in the picture of health, it can be very dangerous for folks. So don't do what I did, folks. Go very slowly. If you come from a highly toxic, high oxalate background, reduce your portion sizes down slowly. You can get to a place where you eventually clear them all out. So what I was told by Sally was add some oxalate foods back in. If you're having a particularly bad dumping day where you feel brain fogged and headached and like you're all achy and feel miserable, tea is very high in oxalates. So a double tea bag black tea will be very good. Pieces of chocolate. It sounds counterintuitive. I know it sounds crazy. I was like, what? I've got to add these things back in? No. Sweet potato, piece of sweet potato. I chose all the lesser of the evils that I didn't want. And I chose blueberries and fruit because some fruits are high in oxalates, some are medium and some are low. I started with bananas, which tend to be medium depending on the ripeness of them, and blueberries, which I still keep into my diet this day. Blueberries can be low to medium oxalate. So that gives me my oxalate intake during the day that basically slows my body down during the night, because that's when we do all of our clearing and healing during the night. That's when the body gets it out. So I have my blueberries as sort of and fruit as my last bite of the day. It's in my system. My body's not going, all right, party time, get it out. It's saying, okay, we've got some more coming in. We can do this slowly and not dangerously. Think all of a sudden forming kidney stones or worse. Yeah, don't do what I did.
Yeah. So then for the long term, if you're adding in some lower oxalate or medium oxalate fruits and things, your body would then naturally slowly release all of these oxalates. It wouldn't just like dump them out at once.
Yeah. And for some folks, they have ended up in hospital where the dumping has been that bad if they go too fast, too quickly. Again, now I know folks will listen to this and go, oh, this sounds crazy, James. I know carnivores that have been going like this and they're just fine and oxalates are not a problem. Okay, that may be for you. And people will say, well, so-and-so didn't ate a lot of vegetables that were high in oxalate. They don't have any problem. Again, everyone's unique, Olivia. Everyone's coming at this differently. Folks have heard my story now in depth, and I apologize for rambling sometimes, but I tell this all to say is that you have to understand we're all coming at this from a different background. Like I had so many, and you had so many things going on where you were compromised in your immune system. So it was like the rain bucket effect where it finally just overflowed and your body just couldn't handle it anymore. I mean, you had radiation poisoning on top of it, for God's sakes. And, you know, there's often the example of, well, my grandmother smoked for 80 years and she never developed cancer. Well, I'm happy for your grandma, but pretty much, you know, you're playing with a Russian roulette if you're going to smoke. We know that at least now. I mean, that's very lucky for her and I'm happy for her. But at the same time, there's going to be folks that say, oh, well, oxalate's just a bunch of hooey. Until you feel it, who feels it knows it. And I've seen so many folks in this space now that have had unbelievable turnarounds from not even going carnivore, but just lowering the amount of oxalate that they have on their daily basis. Unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, and also, yeah, it's very individual for each person, how they approach the diet or whether they're removing vegetables or leaving in a couple or eating low ox fruits and things like that. Also, it's your family history. Like you said, your mom was mainly vegetarian. So then her diet would then go through you when you were born. So then it's just what you were born with, what you're more susceptible to. So it's very personalized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yep, sadly, my mom has a lot of health conditions going on, Olivia, at the moment. And I'm hopeful, and I keep suggesting to her that she should add back in animal foods, and I hope it's going through because I know in my heart that it would have a profound effect on her health like it did for me. And yeah, it's just been revolutionary for me. So besides now my little blueberries, I only eat meat and meat products. I do continue to have dairy, which, as I mentioned, because dairy is another lever for myself that I wanted to put on weight. I know a lot of people go, oh, James, you're so lucky you get to put on weight. But unless you've been on the extreme end where you look like you're in starvation malnutrition mode, which I did, and people thought I was dying because, yeah, I'm so thankful that I'm able to have put weight back on, and healthy weight in terms of muscle and exercise. So yeah, lever that I pull often to put on weight is dairy for folks, because it's an easy way to gain weight if you want to. And it's delicious. Let's face it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that segues perfectly into how would you approach a vegan, whether it's a close friend or family member, how would you approach them in a soft way so that's not like dropping a bombshell? You're basically going to eventually kill yourself eating this way.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Olivia, and one that I get all the time. I often recommend folks, and I want to shout out my good friend Casey Ruff from Boundless Body Radio, who put together a long-form podcast called Ex-Vegans Returning from Malnutrition, of which I am blessed to be a part. And it's basically almost a 3 and a bit hour podcast of excerpts that he's conducted and Casey has one of the most amazing podcasts. I aspire to his greatness. I mean, he's got like 500 episodes or something now with all the leaders in this space. And he took the best clips of folks talking about what happened to them when they went vegan and how they healed themselves. And as I mentioned, I was the one who led off that episode. I'm so blessed to be able to do that. And I often direct folks to that episode. I'm like, I understand, and from speaking to other ex-vegans, the ideology that you can get wrapped up into, the identity that you feel with it, and obviously the whole way of eating and being and friendships that are formed. It's very, very difficult, and people put up walls as soon as you suggest, oh no, this is nope, I'm never considering it. All I'll say is that listen to things like that. Listen to other online people where there's not the in-your-face, dogma coming from it or any sort of anger, and just be open. Just be open to other ideas. It's so important. Like, if I hadn't have found and Sally's presentation online, which I came across, I don't want folks to get to the state that I got to. And I've spoken to too many ex-vegans now, just too many, Olivia, where they went through very, very similar situations. You can see it online. It may not happen to you now. You may feel great. You may be 10 years in and you're great, but trust me, the piper always has to get paid. And I hate to use that analogy, but do you really want to be in your 50s or 60s and bedridden? No, you don't. Like, you don't have to give up all your vegetables. And that's not what I'm telling you to do. Just be mindful and just be understanding that there are a lot of dangers with this way of eating. As Dr. Ken Berry once said, it's unprecedented in human history, the vegan diet. It really isn't. This whole vegan thing is something new, and it's being pushed on us. We know it is. And what really gets me upset is when I see it being pushed on kids. They don't know any better. It drives me crazy, Olivia. It just drives me nuts when I see parents forcing their children to eat the vegan diet and thinking about how impactful being that age, especially young, 0 to 10 years, for brain development, for physical health, musculature development. Thank goodness that I had that little foray when I did at boarding school that allowed me to at least grow to 6'2" and put on some muscle and be then. Imagine if I had been my whole way. I don't know. I probably wouldn't be here today. Sorry, I'm really getting on my soapbox here, Olivia, but super passionate about this because I've been there and I've felt that.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And it just brought me to remember we had these vegetarian friends and they had a newborn and they were feeding it a vegetarian diet and the baby was deficient in, I think it's if you're deficient in B12 or vitamin D, because you're not getting any animal products, that causes eczema. So she was completely covered in baby eczema, was crying all the time because, of course, it's really painful. And I just felt so sorry because you're coming into this world and you're already angry and sad at yourself because you have all this. So you're not comfortable in your own body. And yeah, it's really sad and horrific. So yeah, very great to get the message out there.
Yeah. And I will say, just let me reiterate that. And I did get on my soapbox there for a second, but what I want to say is that for anyone that has a family member, please encourage them to at least be open-minded to watch things like that podcast or other presentations from folks that have a story to tell about their healing journey, because you just never know. It may strike a nerve and be like, yeah, people when they're just on their own and they're thinking to themselves and don't feel like they're being shouted at or yelled down, are much more apt to listen rather than put up walls. So just be gentle in the approach. Understand that is very difficult. I understand because I was there and I talked about how difficult it was for me to wrap around putting animal foods back in my diet. But I can tell you that once you experience the healing benefits, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, once you experience health and you actually feel good, you don't really want to ever go back. Well, so that brings me to, it was very recent, your switch over and your whole transformation. It was in, I think, 2020 that you had mentioned that you got, or you switched over?
Yeah, so 2020 was when I was at my sickest. The pandemic hit. I kind of found Sally, I want to say summer 2020. I slowly started lowering oxalates for a few months. And as I said, felt definite benefits, but still it wasn't until I hit that second gear and decided I was going to go full carnivore. And I did that towards the Christmas of 2020. And then 2021, I was a couple of months in and then it bang came back. So yeah, I've had and I went really strict. That's the time. Yeah, that's it. And now, yeah, it's been almost a couple of years, a year and a half plus now of being this way of eating for me. And I have never, ever felt better. Listeners should know I'm 51 years old now. I feel like I'm 20 years younger. I really do. I'm like, it's unbelievable. My mental clarity, my health, my physicality, everything has come back. I'm just a walking testament, which is why I wanted to do this. That's why I love being asked to come on podcasts like yours, Olivia, because it gives me a chance to tell this story and just maybe help someone. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And people should go and check the before and after pictures, because that's absolutely impressive to see the before and then the now, because you look younger now than before, both physically and just, your musculature, and you've been able to gain weight and muscle weight, not unhealthy weight. And that's very impressive. So what does your diet look like now? You have to mention, I know that you get asked this a lot, but the turkey bacon.
Aha. Great question, Olivia. Huh, man, you're so awesome at this. So yeah, my diet now, actually, I just removed turkey bacon this week. I've taken it out, but leading up to it, yes, I found out. And again, super question, because it allows me to tell folks, I get this all the time, be your own N of one, experiment with what works for you. Like, you see all these folks out here eating ribeyes every day and having pork and all these, pork crisps and pork bacon. I found out that pork just did not sit well with me. It's still, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the fat. I had to have something leaner, but I still wanted something like bacony in the morning. So it was turkey bacon for almost the whole duration until recently. My day basically starts off with a cup of hot water, Celtic sea salt, and lemon. I hydrate myself, and the lemon is part of the Oxalate. That's a Sally Norton tip, which is really great because it gets some lemon juice is very good at breaking down oxalate crystals in the body. So you get that lemon juice and Celtic sea salt, just to get that sort of hydration in the morning. About an hour later, I've cooked breakfast. It's usually ground beef patties with a couple of pats of butter on top. And I had turkey bacon up until recently. One thing that I'll tell your listeners now, that I found out that I also was intolerant to egg whites for a long time. So I started out eating a lot of eggs, but I was like, why am I feeling like kind of brain foggy afterwards? And I went to yolks. So I was only eating yolks for almost a year and a couple of months. Sat well. More recently, and this ties into with taking out the turkey bacon, I added duck eggs back in. And folks should understand that duck eggs have different protein structure than chicken eggs, So they're can be more tolerable. And thus far, I got to say, this is the third day of having duck eggs. No issues. I'm super excited. So I've got duck eggs back in my diet. I took the turkey bacon out just because I just wanted to take it out and see how I did with duck eggs and ground beef and butter. Also have kefir in the mornings. After I have my meal, I have a glass of kefir. It's just absolutely wonderful. I did too mad for a long time, but because of my desire to put on weight, I have a goal to get to about 180, 185 pounds. I'm about 8 pounds off that goal now, which is great, considering I was down at 127 when I put on plus 50 pounds now and more, which is wonderful for me. I added that third meal back in, which was simply some more ground beef patties at lunch. Dinner time is where I kind of get excited and have my steaks, or up until recently, a lot of chicken. I'd eaten a lot of chicken because I found that I tolerated easily chicken wings, chicken thighs, but I definitely have my steaks. And again, it depends. I started out eating a lot of New York strips and ribeye, but more recently, because of the expense of everything, I just kind of have the less expensive cuts. I will have strips on some occasion and ribeyes on some occasion, but things like picanha, I love. They tend to be less expensive. Chuck roasts, really good. But yeah, the evenings are where I have that. And then the last thing, as I mentioned, is that I will have some heavy cream, usually whipped, with a quarter of a cup of blueberries for my oxalate as my last sort of little bite in the evenings. But I keep my diet pretty consistent that way.
Yeah. Okay. So the turkey bacon removal, I'm just sad about that, because the one time I want to ask you about it, it's now gone. That was just because you just removed it because you wanted to just get rid of it. Yeah. There wasn't like any issues with it.
No, none whatsoever. To be honest with you, Olivia, I'm trying now a little bit to cut down on I want to focus more on ruminant red meat for a while and see how I do, and eggs, and get eggs back in for their nutritional benefit. I ate a ton of chicken over the past year and turkey bacon, which did me well, because as you transition, you just need to eat. You just need to eat animal food. Some people get so stuck on, I need to do lion diet. I need to do ruminant meat. However, as we go along, as I'm sure you're finding out, it just wasn't as satiating anymore. Like the turkey bacon was great. It got me over the hump, but I was still hungry. And the chicken wings and the chicken thighs, I just was craving more ruminant red meat, beef, bison, even elk recently, which I tried this week for the first time, which was great. So yeah, things like more nutrient dense food, more bang for the buck. I took the turkey bacon out. Still love it. Still, recommend that to folks if they need something to get over and they can't tolerate pork. I still, unfortunately, tried pork recently. Didn't go well, so I'm just keeping that out for now. And anyway, just keeping more ruminant red meat in because of how beneficial, nutritionally dense it is.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Well, I recently tried beef bacon and I love that. So if you can access that, I would definitely recommend trying that.
Oh, I'm so jealous right now. I've had it before. I had it when I was in Austin visiting. I had the beef bacon. I'm like, so good. Can't get it here. I keep telling the people here, please get it. It looks so good.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, a godsend. But anyway, so that then brings me into, what is the price difference between eating when you were eating vegan versus now, or even vegetarian?
Oh my goodness. Night and day. You can imagine the expense, or can be expense, when you have to monitor and buy all these different types of produce and spices and herbs and marinades to make things taste good. I mean, some people are like, well, I didn't do that. Yeah, you had to. And especially when you need to buy organic, glyphosate free, and organic tends to be way more expensive. All the fruits and vegetables, it added up. And I remember my cart was full. My fridge was full. Now, I mean, my grocery bill's gone in half, especially as I mentioned to you, now that I've gone to lesser price cuts of meat, which I actually enjoy, finding cheaper stuff that perhaps is, going on sale, or they have a chuck roast sale where I portion my own chuck steaks out of it. Definitely cheaper way to eat. Also, because you can store meat in a freezer, which is great. You don't have spoilage and wastage. I mean, I remember my garbage tin was full of fermented stuff, and then which I would put in obviously a compost, but now that's it. That stuff's gone. Once it's out of the freezer and in my belly, there's no wastage there. It's gone. So yeah, definitely cheaper.
Yeah, because I bet I remember this would happen to us too. You buy a head of lettuce, after a couple of days, you have to chop off half of it and throw half of it away because it went bad. So you're only eating half of it. But so in the end, you're kind of paying for double. And then you need everything to actually make it taste good. So then it's even more expensive. Yeah.
Oh man, it's funny. It's funny how you progress on this diet and how your food signals, and hunger cues change, and what you crave. Like I remember early on, everyone goes through the same thing. We go through a carb and sugar withdrawal. It's plain and simple. That's what I did. I mean, when I was a vegan, even though I ate a lot of good stuff, whole foods plant-based, whole food plant-based can also include things like high sugar fruits and dates and chocolate and desserts, almond flour products, if we did, or baking goods, sweet treats. And I went through it, man. I was like, oh, I'm not sugar addicted, nonsense. And boy, you feel it. But then once your body starts craving, like I said, now it's craving the ruminant red meat. Oh, it's so great because you get that full feeling. You feel satiated. You feel nourished. The feeling of nourishment is undescribable. It's so good. And I saw, by the way, I segue into a question. I saw that you said you had a plate the other day where you had like almost 2 pounds of meat in one sitting, and you got really full. I've done that before too.
Yeah, there can be a point where you eat a bit too much protein, and then you get like the meat sweats. I was just sitting there for a while, like I'm not doing that again. And that only happened because I ate really early in the morning, and then we were out for a very long time. We got back at around 5 or 6 p.m. and I ate at, I think, 9 a.m. and I was just very hungry. And I ate way too much.
It can happen for sure. I had that a lot early on, because I'll tell the listeners that when I was first starting out, my body was craving the fat. Even though I couldn't have it, it was craving it. So I really had to go slowly with my fat intake, as we discussed at length. But now, man, I can put it back. But that's also the other great thing, is my body will definitely tell me, as Dr. Chafee often likes to say, if you're in the middle of eating a steak and that bite doesn't taste good anymore, that's probably a sign. But I'm stubborn still too. I just want to finish the steak.
I have to agree. Yeah. No matter what, it still always tastes good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, is there anything else that you want to add on? We've kind of touched up on a lot of things. Obviously, we continued chatting for hours because there's just a lot there. But for the sake of keeping this listenable till the end, is there anything else that you would like to add on or share?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you again, Olivia. This is always a pleasure to see and speak with you and to be able to share my story. We definitely need to do a part 2. We can go into it, delve into not only your story some more on my channel, if you'd be so gracious to come and join me again, but also to delve into my story with potential questions that come your way. I'd be more than happy to do it. I would just say to folks is that don't give up. Just keep trying. It can be a very dark place when you're coming at trying to heal your body from years of illness. And that included mental for me too. I was very depressed because of my physical state. I was very anxious because of my dietary choices. They wanted to put me on antidepressants. I refused. Whether that was a wise decision at the time, I don't know, but I'm glad that I did now. Because the carnivore way of eating also healed me mentally too, besides physically. And just take one step at a time. As with anything in life, it can feel overwhelming if you try to tackle too much at once. And you'll come across stuff online where people are like, you need to do this, go harder in this way of eating. Trust me when I tell you, I left all that behind when I left veganism behind, because I was told to double down. I wasn't doing veganism hard enough. You needed to juice more raw, do this. No, come on. Carnivore way of eating is about healing fundamentally, and whatever works for you, as I said earlier, be your own N of one, experiment. If you have questions, reach out to folks like Olivia, Coach Olivia, and myself, and we'd be happy to help. Thank you.
That was great. And yeah, I completely agree. You have to just follow your own path and see what works out for you, whether you start off doing one thing and then eventually switch on to something else. So yeah. Well, thank you so much, and definitely would love to have you back on again. We need to talk about the mental aspect too, because that's something I would love to talk about more, and also just healing mental health issues as well.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think I still have some of the protocol bottles from my heavy metal and parasite stuff. I'll bring them along for the next one to show folks exactly what was in them in case there's any interest there. And yeah, albeit I will say, as I mentioned earlier, Olivia, very, very powerful. So if you suspect that you have heavy metals, there's the shoemaker protocol out there for a lot of different toxicities and mold and things like that. But just be aware that try and get yourself into as a healthy position dietarily as you can before you go full bore into detox, because detox is a very powerful thing. And I went at it when I was at my worst position, and it very nearly made me get much worse because it was too powerful at the time. However, it can be a very powerful and beneficial thing if you can get to a place of, potentially having enough strength to be able to do it. That's where I'm trying to get at, is that I didn't have the strength looking back to be able to do that. I'm glad that I did what I did, because it got me the ball rolling. But yeah, just to be careful and be aware. Yeah,
definitely. And so where can people find you online if they don't already follow you?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on Instagram. I'm there a lot. I'm definitely in my stories these days more than posting, but that'll change in a little while. It's at the _carnivorist with a T. The same thing on Twitter, and the same thing on YouTube, where I post my podcasts for the week. And I'm also on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, as my podcasting channel. So please check out, come visit me. I'm the one that answers all the messages, and I'll definitely be there if you have any questions.
Great. So thank you for coming on and sharing your story. It's actually been very inspirational and a lot more in depth than I was thinking originally. So you need to share it more.
I will. It's definitely, honestly, Olivia, one day I want to write a book if I can. I really do, because I really feel that it's a miracle for me. That's why I have such joy for life and joy for doing these things. I really am thankful, because like I said before, who feels it knows. And if you come back from a place where you're literally scared if you're going to see the next day or week, and you're now living life and thriving again, you want to shout it from the rooftops, don't you? And I know you know.
Yeah. Yep. You want to, share and spread the message as much as you humanly can.
Yes. Yeah. Great to see you. Thank you so much for having me.